Today, the Premier League is the most powerful league in the world. It is the league that attracts the best players, the biggest sponsors, and is followed on every continent, but it hasn't always been that way. If the Premier League has become what it is today, it's because one day, in the autumn of 1990, 6 executives from the biggest English clubs at the time decided to meet in secret around a table, alongside the head of the most powerful sports television channel in the country. This meeting, organized far from the public eye, would transform English football forever, and by extension, world football, because at that moment, there was an urgent need. English football at the time was neither attractive, nor modern, nor even profitable. It was on the brink of collapse, even implosion, as everything that had held English football together until then was falling apart. And to understand why this secret meeting took place, and why it changed the history of football, we need to go back to what English football really was before 1990. By the late 1980s, English football was built on an outdated economic model. Clubs relied almost entirely on ticket sales. Television was underexploited, TV rights were low, and commercial revenues were extremely limited. At that time, sponsorships were still marginal. Shirt sponsorships were not even allowed until the early 1980s. A major source of income, which today seems obvious, simply did not exist. And the problem was that even this dependence on gate receipts was starting to collapse. In the 1950s, English stadiums welcomed an average of nearly 38,000 spectators per match. By the late 1980s, that figure had fallen to around 19,000. Families stopped going to the stadium. The middle classes did too. Going to matches became less and less attractive, even discouraging. English football was also plagued by violence that had become almost normal. Hooliganism was an integral part of the matchday experience. Fights between supporters, clashes with the police, mass arrests, all of this happened every weekend. So much so that the state stepped in directly. Under Margaret Thatcher's government, hooliganism was treated as a national security issue. The response was mainly repressive, with increasingly heavy police presence around matches. Some proposals show how far this logic went. Ken Bates, then owner of Chelsea, officially requested permission to install electric fences around the stands at Stamford Bridge to prevent pitch invasions. The request was rejected, but it revealed the climate of the time. English football was no longer seen as popular entertainment, it was seen as a social problem. By the end of the 1980s, the conclusion was clear. Stadiums were emptying, revenues were stagnating, violence was exploding, and the system seemed incapable of reforming itself from within. And it was in this exact context that 3 tragedies would finally force everyone to face reality. Because by the late 1980s, English football was no longer just an economic and social crisis. It had become deadly. On May 11, 1985, during a third division match between Bradford City and Lincoln City, a fire broke out in one of the stadium stands. The cause was simple and terrifying. Wooden stands, rubbish accumulated beneath the seating, and a single spark were enough. The fire spread within minutes. The toll, 56 people dead and more than 250 injured. This tragedy brutally exposed the true state of English football infrastructure: outdated, dangerous stadiums, completely unfit to host spectators safely. Less than 3 weeks later, on May 29, 1985, English football hit rock bottom on the European stage. The European Cup final pitted Liverpool against Juventus at the Heysel Stadium in Brussels, an outdated, poorly maintained stadium, and above all, completely unfit to host such an event. Even before kickoff, groups of Liverpool supporters charged at Italian fans in a neutral section of the stadium, separated only by simple fencing. Projectiles were thrown, crowd movements intensified, panic spread. Juventus supporters tried to flee. They were pushed back toward a wall already weakened by the condition of the stadium. Under the pressure, the wall collapsed. Dozens of people were crushed or trampled. The toll, 39 dead, mostly Italian supporters, and more than 600 injured. This tragedy became the ultimate symbol of English hooliganism in the 1980s. The reaction was immediate and unprecedented. UEFA banned all English clubs from European competitions for 5 years. Liverpool, directly involved, received an additional sanction and was excluded for 6 seasons. But unfortunately, the worst was yet to come. 4 years later, on April 15, 1989, during an FA Cup semi-final between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest at Hillsborough Stadium, English football reached a point of no return. Because of catastrophic crowd management, hundreds of supporters were directed into stands that were already full. The gates were not closed. The crowd kept moving forward. The pressure quickly became unbearable. Supporters were crushed against the metal barriers. 97 dead and 766 injured. For years, the authorities tried to place the blame on the supporters themselves, but investigations would later reveal a very different reality: a failed organization, inadequate infrastructure, and a deeply rooted culture of negligence. English football could no longer continue as it had before. These three tragedies were not isolated accidents. They were the direct result of a system at breaking point neglected for decades. And for the first time, the state, football authorities, and clubs understood that a deep and fundamental overhaul had become inevitable. A few days after the tragedy, a public inquiry was opened. It was led by Judge Lord Taylor. His report, published in 1990, marked a decisive turning point in the history of English football. Contrary to the dominant narrative of the time, the Taylor report did not blame the supporters. Instead, it pointed to deep structural failures, poorly designed stadiums, catastrophic crowd management, outdated infrastructure, and an obsession with maintaining order at the expense of real safety. The conclusions were severe and the recommendations radical. The report imposed a complete transformation of English stadiums. Stadiums in the top two divisions had to become fully seated, standing terraces were abolished, metal barriers were removed, and the entire spectator experience had to be rethought. The goal was no longer simply to watch a match, but to attend an event in a safe, controlled, and modern environment. The Taylor report did not stop at safety. It forced clubs to take on new responsibilities, to invest massively, and to move away from a model inherited from previous decades. But very quickly, a problem emerged. This modernization came at a colossal cost, and English football simply did not have the means to reform itself within the existing framework. The report addressed safety issues, but above all, it exposed a deeper blockage. The economic and institutional system of English football was exhausted. To fully understand what was at stake, it is necessary to distinguish between two key institutions of English football often confused. The Football Association is the body that governs football in England. It oversees the entire national game and manages the England national team. The Football League, on the other hand, is the organization that runs the professional competitions. At the time, it controlled both the top division and the lower divisions, as well as the redistribution of revenues. It was precisely this unbalanced system that the FA decided to challenge. In 1991, the FA published a fundamental document entitled Blueprint for the Future of Football. Officially, it was a plan for the overall modernization of English football. In reality, it marked a major shift in power. The conclusion was clear. The existing model no longer worked. The Football League, which administered the first, second, third, and fourth divisions simultaneously, was considered too heavy, too slow, and incapable of adapting to modern demands. By treating 92 clubs almost the same way, it diluted the interests of the biggest teams, blocked decision-making, and distributed revenues inefficiently. The blueprint therefore proposed a clean break. It argued for the creation of an autonomous top division capable of making its own decisions, negotiating its own television rights, attracting new revenue, and financing the modernization of stadiums. For the first time, the FA publicly accepted the possibility of a split from the Football League. This was no longer a marginal challenge driven by a few powerful clubs. It was an institutional reform validated at the highest level. But in reality, this institutional shift did not come out of nowhere, because a few months earlier, in the autumn of 1990, while English football was already on the brink of collapse, another event had taken place. A dinner, secretly organized between the executives of several of the biggest English clubs and the head of the most powerful sports television network in the country. That year in London, the executives of the Big Five of the time met around a table. Arsenal, Manchester United, Liverpool, Tottenham, and Everton. Facing them was a key figure, Greg Dyke, head of the most influential sports broadcaster in the country at that moment, ITV Sport. This meeting was strategic. At that precise moment, English football was going through a deep crisis, but it still had one major asset, its television potential, an enormous potential. For years, the biggest clubs had shared the same observation. They generated most of the audience. They attracted the majority of viewers, but they controlled neither the decisions nor the revenues that this audience produced. Television rights were negotiated by the Football League, and a significant share of the money generated by the top division was redistributed to the lower leagues. For the leading clubs, the system had become untenable. They created the value, but had neither the power nor the means to invest in proportion to what they generated. This dinner, therefore, served to put forward a simple and radical idea, to create an independent league made up exclusively of elite clubs, a league capable of negotiating its own television rights directly, controlling its revenues, and deciding its own future. ITV immediately saw the appeal, a championship centered on the best teams, scheduling designed for television, and above all, a product far easier to sell. For the clubs, the stakes were clear. This was not a question of ambition, it was a question of economic survival. Without a change of model, They did not have the means to finance the transformations imposed by the Taylor Report. All of this cost hundreds of millions, and the existing framework simply did not allow it. The break with the Football League was therefore already a concrete project. Above all, for the first time, the big clubs were no longer alone. They had a powerful ally, television, and from that moment on, English football entered an entirely new logic. What followed would unfold very quickly, and it would go far beyond anything the participants at that dinner could have imagined. After the 1990 meeting and the publication of the blueprint for the future of football in 1991, everything accelerated. Top division clubs officially began the process of formally breaking away from the Football League. In February 1992, the split was confirmed. First division clubs officially left the Football League. A few months later, the new competition was launched. The Premier League was born. For the first time in the history of English football, the elite was no longer governed by the same structure as the lower divisions. Clubs now had full control over decisions and, above all, over their revenues. But on paper, this new league remained fragile, because without money, independence meant nothing, and everything now hinged on one central issue: television rights. Logically, ITV already saw itself as the natural broadcaster of the new championship. The channel had supported the project from the beginning. It had taken part in the early discussions. It had helped open the door to the very idea of an independent league, but an unexpected player then entered the race: Sky Television. At the time, Sky was not yet a giant. The channel was young, loss-making, and desperately looking for a product capable of transforming its economic model, and that product was clear to them: English football. Unlike ITV, Sky did not simply want to broadcast matches. It wanted to build its entire strategy around the Premier League. A battle between the two broadcasters began, and at the last moment, Sky struck harder. A financial offer far superior, impossible to refuse. The clubs voted. Sky won the broadcasting rights. The outcome was brutal. The man who had been at the origin of the first discussions, Greg Dyke, was pushed aside. The man who had helped lay the foundations of the project ultimately saw the product slip from his hands. From that moment on, English football definitively entered a new era, an era in which television was no longer just a broadcaster, but the central engine of the system. With Sky, the Premier League is not just broadcast. The entire experience is transformed. More cameras, more replays, faster-paced production, more dynamic commentary, and matches presented as major events. Football becomes a premium product. But above all, Sky changes the economic logic. The Premier League becomes the core of its offer. To watch matches, you have to subscribe. And for people to subscribe, the league has to be attractive every single week. The result? Money pours in. From the very first contract, revenues explode compared to the old Football League, and above all, they increase with every renegotiation. That money makes everything possible: stadium renovations, improved infrastructure, the arrival of top foreign players, the professionalization of marketing, the globalization of the league. Year after year, the Premier League becomes a showcase, broadcast in dozens, then hundreds of countries. But this success comes at a cost, because while the Premier League takes off, the rest of English football stays grounded, and that is where the most lasting fracture of this revolution is created. Because the Premier League's meteoric success does not benefit everyone. Very quickly, a structural gap opens up between the elite and the rest of English football. Before the creation of the Premier League, television revenues were shared collectively. With the Premier League, that logic disappears. To try to limit the damage, a mechanism is introduced: parachute payments. Clubs relegated from the Premier League continue to receive, over several seasons, a portion of the TV revenues, an amount that can reach up to around £95 million over 3 seasons today. The goal is to prevent bankruptcies and give clubs time to adapt to relegation. But in practice, these parachute payments create another imbalance. Relegated clubs have enormous financial resources compared to other second division teams. As a result, the same clubs often go up, go down, then come straight back up again. This model saved English football by making it richer and more attractive, but it also locked in a long-term hierarchy. In the end, this secret meeting didn't just change the organization of English football, it changed its very nature. It helped save a sport on the brink of collapse and modernize it. But by making that choice, English football also embraced a new logic: the logic of money, television, and a long-lasting hierarchy. So the question remains open. Did the Premier League really save English football, or did it simply turn it into a cash machine? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it, boost it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. Thanks for watching. See you very soon.